Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline. My guest this evening is a former councillor from the Moroto area, attorney at law, and representing the SJB. She is, of course, Lihini Fernando. Very good evening to you, Lihini, and welcome.
Good evening, Faraz. Thank you for inviting me, and pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. Now, everybody is talking about this IMF agreement. Part of this IMF agreement, the sort of essential component, is a requirement to increase revenue. And I thought I'd ask you how on earth we are going to increase revenue when we have a set of businesses, sometimes known as state-owned enterprises, that is and has been a drain on Sri Lanka's economy by and large. Most of these state-owned enterprises are a drain on our resources, our financial resources. So in the light of all that, how on earth are we going to get revenue up?
So just to start off, presently we have about close to 400 or some say 500 plus state-owned revenues in the country. And these state-owned revenues, I'd like to say, is more or less like a bleeding ground for the Sri Lankan economy. So because these state-owned, out of the 400 state-owned enterprises, the 52 main state-owned enterprises have been making significant losses. For the first 8 months of 2022, the losses itself comes to about 727 billion. And the SOE losses in 2021 amounts to 73.9% of the health expenditure, 92.1% of the education expenditure, and 51.6% of the Samurdhi expenditure. So if you look at it, these losses are actually bleeding into the economy. So why do we need to restructure these state enterprises? Not merely to increase revenue, but at least to mitigate our losses and to minimize the colossal damage that is caused to the economy, I would say. So as a part of increasing revenue, I said let's leave the increasing revenue aside, because government in totality must have a plan to increase revenue, because what we see right now is piecemeal strategies that are being implemented from time to time. We are being hell-bent and dependent on our traditional sources of income, like the tea, rubber, coconut, tourism, and immigration expenditure that comes to the country, income that comes to the country. But apart from that, I don't think we as a country have focused on, growing our economy per se, and how to mitigate these twin deficits that we've been experiencing for years. So I think, the government must come up with a plan to increase revenue. But apart from that, restructuring the state-owned enterprises, I think is out of the question. It's a no-brainer. I think, we have to agree to that, irrespective of which political party is in power, because that is the need of the hour. I would say, if you look at it, SOEs, in Sri Lanka, if you go back into history, we have seen there have been certain, I would say, brackets in where we went through certain SOE reforms, like from 1989 to 1994, there were 43 SOEs that were restructured. Then 1995 to 2004 period, we saw major SOEs getting restructured again. But from 2005 onwards, the SOEs restructuring has been stalled. And by around 2011, we saw SOEs that were restructured, that was let go, was also taken back into the economy. 37 of it, which was underperforming and making losses, were taken back into the pool. So we as a nation have not had a concentrated plan, I would say, in terms of SOEs, because it has been more or less led by political ideologies, then coalition governments, political narratives, then trade union impacts and trade union trade unions impacting. So political parties, irrespective of their political affiliations, have not been able to view these as enterprises and as businesses, and how they must contribute to the economy. So I think, we have no other solution right now but to restructure and reform. And I mean, when you say reform, these reforms have to be credible reforms, not just, piecemeal reforms from time to time, credible reforms, and where we analyze the existing budgets, analyze the existing financial data. And when you look at it, recently I read some data that has been published by Advocata, and they say the financial information out of these SOEs are only available to 29% of the SOEs. So where is the data, and how can we as a nation make scientific decision? How can we lead to scientific decision making if our decision making is not data driven? So I think in hindsight, we must take stock of where we stand at this point, leave out the political narrative, but look at it from a business perspective, enterprise perspective, and see how this has contributed to the economy and make hard decisions. Because one form of increasing revenue is also to mitigate losses. Because if you take the entities like Sri Lankan Airlines in 2022, there was about 472 million daily loss that is being caused to the economy. So, I mean, these are bleeding grounds. I mean, we talk of it, top-heavy structures, top-heavy infrastructures. We have not gone into our cost structures, the human capital, then the expenditure, the recurrent expenditure, the capital expenditures of these entities, the human capital. So, for us, in totality, these have to be viewed, and the analysis, it has to be data-driven, scientific decision-making. But who is going to do it? Which party is going to do it is the question.
There is also this sort of, it's almost like a culture, really, in which state-owned enterprises appear to think, or that their leaders or the heads of these institutions appear to think that they have a license to lose money. And the fact that they are representing the people's financial interest seems to have gone over their head in that sort of one flew over the cuckoo's nest sort of fashion.
Yeah.
But, and I had on this program a former CFO, actually, and he took some sort of umbrage when I suggested that it was a drain on the Treasury. And he said, oh, no, we haven't taken any money from the Treasury in recent times. But actually, they're just hiding behind detail, because they owe money at one point. I don't know if they still do, but I believe they do, to the CPC, for example, for fuel supplies. And then there are loans outstanding to the state banks. And these are all, at the end of the day, they may be labeled under all sorts of different jolly names, but bottom line is that it is the people's money. The Bank of Ceylon, People's Bank, the Treasury, it's all the people's interest and the people's money. So how would the SJB tackle this problem? Will they resort to meritocracy and pragmatism and honesty, MPH? And also, in terms of these public, where those people are obliged before taking on a job to provide their asset declarations, their asset and liabilities declarations, their political interest, and all sorts of interest, so as to make it very transparent and absolutely clear that they will not have any form of conflict of interest.
So, I mean, SJB repeatedly have said that state-owned enterprises, the reforms must go through. I mean, our economic trio, the economic committee, and even in a blueprint which we put out, we have clearly stated that the state-owned enterprises must be reformed. And the mechanism of reforming is also something which we need to discuss, because it has to be a very scientific way of reforming these entities. Again, for us, the issue is when it comes to policy in this country, the policy structures has been quite volatile, and we have not had like a clear, practical and a transparent mechanism when it comes to these institutions as well. Because one thing for us, we must know that there is a tremendous amount of corruption, waste, that we experience on a day-to-day basis. Waste can be in the form of financial waste. Waste can be in the form of inefficiency. Waste can be in the form of human capital waste, then resource waste. So all of that. And also, time waste. We're not talking about digitalizing any of these entities. So, there are certain entities which are overloaded with staff. How do you restructure these? How do you do job migration, then job restructuring? How do you allocate these cadres? Because today we are talking about a 1.5 million government servants, heavy government servants, and how do you reutilize them? So these are discussions for us that the government must have, and also deep consultations must happen. And there are lots of organizations like the Advocata, the Verite, which they have done many research, and there are independent economists who have presented many findings of this. So if the government is serious about reforms, they must action this out swiftly. See, it is not a condition of the IMF. These politicians come out and say, and certain opposition parties say, IMF is putting all these pressures. Why? We must understand it's not about satisfying the IMF, but it is about cleaning a messed up house within the country. Because we as an economy, we as a country, we need to get our act together, I would say, for us, because we have been tolerating inefficiencies, tolerating bureaucracy, tolerating red tape. We have not gone into digitalization. We don't even have keep KPIs or KPIs, not even job descriptions for certain staff that are working. I mean, I can say the institutions that I have, like the councils, even go down to local councils, we are too much of staff there. And then there is no proper restructuring, and we don't want to talk about those things. And we have seen institutions like the CPC, CEB, where they have been entities for political job-giving entities. Politicians over the years have loaded these entities for their political desires by giving jobs. So, over the years for us, I think parties that have ruled must take responsibility for the destruction of state-owned enterprises. And I think, a concentrated effort must come in. And one of the other notions is this whole privatization.
Sorry, Lihini, let's come back to privatization and so on after this quick break, in which we take a peek in this evening's headline news. And we will return in conversation with Lihini Fernando from the SJB. See you on the other side of the break.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1. TV1, TV for life.
Senior citizen dies while in line to obtain Aswasuma welfare benefit letter. Dental and kidney surgeries at risk due to medicine shortage. SLPP and other political groups warn President to call for provincial council polls. Vasanta Mudulige arrested again. French President Emmanuel Macron to visit Sri Lanka tomorrow.
TV1, TV for life. Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And welcome back to Newsline. I'm in conversation with Mrs. Lihini Fernando from the SJB, attorney at law, former councillor, and a passion for administration, public administration. Lihini, I know that you have this passion and so on for better governance and so on. But honestly speaking, this business about the state-owned enterprises, it has been a place where politicians give their favorites, people who have helped them, who have supported them, jobs and position and so on. But none of these people, apart from a very few, actually deliver the goods in terms of running a sound commercial establishment. What would you do as the SJB? What would you do in terms of the appointment of public appointments? What would you do rather than? I mean, now we have high post committees just for say the ambassadors and that sort of thing. Shouldn't it extend all down the line?
Yeah. So I will just say my opinion, but like maybe it can be a bit controversial, but then this is, we have to acknowledge the fact that, our ministers who have run these entities, that they have not done it in a profitable manner. So all these cabinet ministers in this country who run entities, are they responsible for a P&L? Are they responsible for the budget that they present, the budget of the particular ministry? I mean, when the budgets are presented, to what extent do we take stock of the previous year's budgets, not just the budget spending, but the profitability or the loss that the ministry has acquired? I think that is the starting point. If you are a cabinet minister, you must be given certain targets by the executive that this is how your ministry must be delivered. Then it must cascade downwards. I mean, I can say this because prior to I coming into politics, I've worked in the private sector. I mean, in organizations, I mean, for us, where your media station work, a particular CEO will not be kept in his position if the entity is loss making. He's responsible for his P&L at the end of the day. I mean, these state-owned enterprises, these ministers also must understand that these entities also must be run and managed in a profitable manner. How do you get along with this? You need to know your numbers. You need to know your staff. You need to know your efficiency levels. If technology is not brought in, that has to be brought in. So I think, Sri Lanka has a need of scientific governance for us. And scientific governance, one part of it is transparency, accountability, and also ensuring that it is governed, it is managed in a proper manner. So the ministers who are appointed must have that knowledge. So, I mean, today we see the ministers, sad to say for us, you and I are led with ministers with not even basic education. I am of a firm believer. Right. Anybody can represent parliament, but ministries must be run with people with at least some knowledge who can actually understand math. We call in Sri Lankan politics, it's about political maneuvering. It's about how you play the game. It's not about proper scientific management. Hence, we are in this position for us, and we must acknowledge the fact that we have failed, and how do we come out of it? So the only way to get about with it is the executive, starting from the executive and the parliament, who is responsible, parliament who is responsible for public finance, must either have a committee within the parliament. Now you have the COPAS, have a committee for state-owned enterprise management. Their financials must be scrutinized. Their plans must be scrutinized. Ministers must be called in front of these committees, and they must be asked the hard questions. They must be asked to present their plans for these entities. Ideally, when a minister takes position, he must take stock of what exactly has happened. He must present a report. Then you have, there is auditor general there's an auditor general in this country, and all these state-owned enterprises have an internal audit department. So the internal audit department does have the reports. If you go through these reports, you can understand what are the pain points in these organizations, and you must address those. It's no point for us saying, okay, there are losses, we need to go to court and file cases. But there are certain measures that the government and the particular ministers that they can take to mitigate these losses. Are we doing this? No, we are not doing it. Are the people in the top chairs driving this change? No, they are not driving the change. So from time to time, we come and say, entities are loss-making, we need to restructure, we are bleeding. But there is waste. How do you mitigate waste? So I think, for us, personally, I think we need to take stock, analyze the numbers, and clean the house.
It's quite true. I'd just like to point out some startling statistics which emerged on Newsline a couple of days ago when I had the president of the Commissioners Association of Sri Lanka. They're all, inland revenue people. And Mr. Priyanka told me on the program that pre-2019, that means before Gotabaya Rajapaksa's tax cuts, they had approximately 1.5 million tax files. No sooner the 2019 tax cuts kicked in, that figure came down to by 1 million. And so we only had 500,000 tax files. So from 1.5 million, we lost 1 million tax files because they didn't have to pay. So, they went below the radar. And so today we are left with approximately 450,000 tax files. But the revenue is up because obviously the tax rates are up. But I wonder if public officials who make, and after all, the president of the country is also a public official, and although they enjoy immunity whilst they are in office, I wonder if there shouldn't be a law of zero tolerance in terms of mismanagement, and that they should be held accountable. I mean, President Gotabaya took all these decisions. It is no good him saying now that he was misled by ABC and XYZ. And the bottom line is the buck has to stop there with the president. And it's almost a shame, really, when you see these officials enjoying the perks of their office, although they have put Sri Lanka and its people in a terrible, terrible, terrible mess. And I think people ought to, don't you think that people should consider this before parting with their wonderful
Exactly,
vote?
Bharat. I think, we don't have the accountability culture in this country. We think, ministers think running a ministry is like, a form of earning tenders, proposals, all that, foreign investors coming in, what is my deal, what is my cut. That is always been the name. The ministerial position in this country is a nice to have position, but technically ministerial position is a responsibility. Tomorrow for us, if we implement a system where these ministers are accountable, where they are asked the hard questions, if they are responsible for their P&Ls, if that they have to deliver the right number, I doubt half of these ministers will want to run a ministry, because we have not had that culture in this country. If you start asking them the hard questions, they will be the first people to run away from these ministries. Because if we bring in the culture of zero tolerance to corruption, looking at the numbers, asking hard questions, I don't think any of these ministers, because they are not, we don't have competent people running for us. So again, what I'm saying is this: we must take stock of this country. We must take stock of where we are today. And there is, for the private sector in this country to be the driving engine, and for those entities to flourish versus the public sector to be so loss making, there is a serious problem for us. So I think even the legislature of this country, the regulations, all of these must be taken a deep look at for us. See, I want to talk this through. We don't have close legislative scrutiny in this country. The legislatures that are passed, we don't go back and see whether these are implementation friendly, how these legislations can be, revised. We don't have these conversations for us. So I think, in totality, the executive right now has a responsibility to ensure that we do the hard reforms. And I think Parliament also must support these reforms. Yes, the whole conversation of privatization there are sides to it. People ask the question, should the profit-making entities be privatized? Or is it only the loss-making entities? But when you say privatization, there are different models of privatization. There are public-private partnerships, there are ESOPs, stock options, then listing. So what sort of privatization are we talking about? Because is it divesting the entity? So through privatization, you can even enhance the revenue of an entity. So not the same model can be applied. So the way CEB is handled is not the same way Sri Lankan Airlines have to be handled. So I think this. Just that there are IMF conditions that we have to fulfill. But apart from that, we must look at this as the need of the hour. in order to ensure that we take this country out of this bleeding ground, and that we no longer we will be loss making, and that these credible reforms go through, because there is no room for waste, there's no room for inefficiency. What we need is policy transformation, implementation, and also commitment towards driving sustainable change in this country. I think it's not just a government's response. I think people in the decision-making spaces must talk this, and also the right narrative for us must be communicated to the people, why this is important. One thing, the sad factor of this country for us is that everything is a political tool. Tomorrow, if everything is flipped down and sold to the people, saying a political rhetoric is communicated to people, and our people in this country are not politically very sound to understand. So they will gullibly believe, oh my God, we are losing our country, we are selling this to a foreign entity, because we have an island mentality. We don't see beyond. We don't see the importance of building bridges with other countries and how we can take Sri Lanka globally. So, there's a responsibility for the politicians also to communicate the right narrative, and there's a responsibility for the people also to ask the hard questions. So I think we have no choice but to, do the hard reforms. If not, we will never come out of this crisis.
Lihini Fernando, thank you very much for being on Newsline and for being so upfront, open. It's all part of the ethos of the Newsfirst Newsline anyway. And so we've much enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So the bottom line is, the take home is, you need to be earnest and passionate about reforming corruption, basically, eliminating corruption, including at state-owned enterprises. Lihini Fernando, thank you very much. It's now time for the primetime news. Take care, have a great evening as much as you can, and God bless you all.